culture have set global trends. We have seen our backdrops being used to discover the meaning of a 5,000-year-old Indian tradition. In the past 20 years, we have served the best in the world and built the best for our roads. We have even managed to light up our own African nights.
The Aecon Lighting Africa mission is to prepare a brighter future for children and the African continent.
To 20 years of an ever-changing conversation. The Jinadine Group, 20 years of shaping African conversations.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Are you proud to be African? Look at all those people that make our continent so proud. And so I think as we gather here in Kigali.
My name is Jinadine Kariuki, and you're watching Shaping African Conversations.
Sorry. As we gather today in Kigali, I think we should all really recognize the fact that we are so proudly African, and which is why we are here. We're here because we really value who we are. And I think Tebe, who always has such a great impact on me personally when he makes us so proudly wanting to be who we are as people and to really value the work and the people of the continent. So it's such a pleasure to join you here today. It's a huge privilege to be featured amongst some of the leading voices on the continent, exploring and unpacking the new narrative and frontiers for how we can each contribute a thread to the rich tapestry of African stories. Because as we know, the continent is not a single story. It's just a single idea told by a lone voice. Yesterday, I visited the Genocide Museum, an experience I must admit I wasn't really looking forward to. I was not sure if I could manage to hold it together, but something interesting happened. Whilst I felt saddened and pained at what had happened in this beautiful country, I also drew strength from the knowledge that it is possible to rise from the pain of the past and intentionally create a future of hope. The story of this amazing country is really like a mirror of the African continent. When we look into a mirror, we do so not only to see the image as it is, but mirrors help us correct the image that we see. It is not only about seeing our challenges and pain, but we also have a chance to correct what is wrong in the reflection. My visit to the museum vividly illuminated the fact that it isn't about a single narrative which ends with the image of pain reflecting back, but it is also about the narrative of hope, which is about correcting and fixing aspects of that image. But how do we make sure we as communications professionals are able to not only look into the mirror, but fix that image that we see? I think Richard talked about us not being makeup artists and about being realistic. And in essence, amplify not only our own voices, but those in the chorus behind us. How do we turn our platforms into a megaphone? To begin with, we must be sure we have something to say. Now, for those of you who know me, it comes as no surprise that I always have something to say. It may be a function of my more than 29 years as an entrepreneur, a business owner, and a philanthropist. It might be a function of my personal vision of having a hand in and shaping African conversations, no matter where they happen. And it might be a function of raising two exceptional children into extraordinary adults. But it also might be a function of being told, at least in the beginning, to keep quiet. As a woman, an African woman on the continent starting out in this business, I was the one who during meetings was asked to pour the tea or to take minutes, or complimented not on the quality of my ideas, but on the cut of my blouse. And I may have kept quiet, but not for long. Because when you have something to say and you want to leave your mark, you have to stand up. So I did, and I don't think I've sat down much since. Over the course of my career, I've been gratified that I'm no longer standing up alone. Just looking around this room at all of the women who have joined our community of professionals, who are now leaders in our community of professionals, demonstrates that we are increasingly recognizing the value of diversity among the shapers of our narratives on this continent, of the value of different perspectives and trajectories to success and growth. So why, then, is it so easy to collapse that narrative when we're telling our stories outside? We live on a continent and are part of a people where the most extraordinary achievements and innovations are eclipsed by the inconvenient truth of a single narrative, where success and marvel are elided by a convenient shorthand of poverty porn and elephants. How many times have you, as professionals, as ambassadors for this extraordinary continent and her people, how many times have you been told by international clients, look, people just won't get it. They're not interested in nuance when it comes to Africa. Just throw in an acacia tree and some smiling children into the brief and we just move along. But when we move along, when we smile and appreciate that this brief is easy and allows us to move along to other things that take more thinking and creativity and expression of what we truly know that Africa is, when we say okay and move along, what are we really saying? We are saying that our stories and our history and our learning and experience and our future are being collapsed into a false narrative, into a convenient truth and shorthand about our beloved continent. We do ourselves a disservice that our dear belated brother Binyavanga Wainaina defined in his seminal essay about how to write about Africa that makes our characters colorful, exotic, larger than life, but empty inside with no dialogue, no conflicts or resolutions in our stories, no depth or quirks to confuse the cause. And we do a disservice to the efforts of others, like our dearly departed brother, Komla Damour, our late lamented boss player, to tell the African story with balance and integrity. When we perpetuate the single story, a single narrative told by a single voice, we do ourselves a disservice. We allow others to tell us who we are and contribute to misguided ideas that undermine our strength. And those misguided ideas, as Chimamanda writes, can have unintended consequences. I consider that we catalyze change by not being so afraid to find, We only have to look at the recent job posting by the venerated New York Times for its East African business chief. Yes, I know you've seen that one. To see unintended consequences of how others see us, unexpected stories of hope. We only have to look at a recent report by the UK Parliament released in July that discovered that Africans were twice as likely to be rejected for non-immigrant visas to visit, study, or participate in conferences in Britain as any other foreign national. Unintended consequences driven by the perception that life in Africa, as journalist Nesreen Malik writes, is one to be fled. To leave our mark, then, to mitigate these unintended consequences, we must be on the front lines of changing the perception of the continent. That is our responsibility, the responsibility of all of us in this room. But how do we who see the New York Times as a big get for our clients, help catalyze that change? How can we all move from the comfort of our success to significance if we do not reflect? I consider that we catalyze change by not being so afraid to find dissonance in the way we speak and who we say we speak for, when we tell the stories of where we come from. Because while there is beauty in harmony, there is also beauty in dissonance. On our continent of Komlas and Binyas, of Nesreens and Chimamandas, we choose to crowd the hallways of social media platforms like we crowded the hallways of our secondary schools with our hashtags and our campaigns and our memes. But to truly leave our mark, to truly catalyze change, we must move from the virtual into the real, to be unafraid of dissonance without the veil of anonymity. In the virtual space, we are warriors for justice. How then can we, in our real spaces, remain silent in the face of injustice and allow or promote or give space to single voices in prayer that excludes rather than includes? How then can we, in our real spaces, lend credence to wars that demonize the other, or condone corruption that stifles dissent, or validate decisions that compromise the future in service to the status quo? We have our platforms and our megaphones and an ability to leave our mark with the privilege of our voices. We have a responsibility to use that privilege at home and outside. One of the ways I try to use my own privilege is through my work as a UN Goodwill Ambassador and an ambassador for the Kenya Red Cross. As an honorary ambassador of UNFPA, I have used my voice, my something to say, my dissonance to promote gender equality, to lend a hand to those less fortunate than us, to promote and empower women in health and in education and in leadership, to make room on this podium for others like me or others not like me. And maybe to leave the podium to others. Maybe it's time to sit down and support them to find there's something to say. To leave your mark sometimes, maybe, is to leave the stage at the right time, but not before making sure that stage is set for something transcendent. So here is my challenge to you, the transcendent ones, the leaders and the megaphones of our 55 countries, my competitors and collaborators. We have an opportunity as a community of professionals to change the status quo, to leave our mark by intervening to prevent the unintended consequences of a single story. We have an opportunity to shape new narratives and to challenge perceptions if we come together as a community and reject the brief of smiling children and acacia trees and elephants. And we have a moral and personal responsibility to challenge our own unconscious bias as we leave our legacy for our children, to ensure that in telling and retelling African stories, that we're not perpetuating the single narrative. And I think sometimes we really need to question our own bias towards ourselves. You know, how often do we say, oh, they're from Nigeria, well, then they must be a certain way, or they're from South Africa. So I think, you know, part of us today is looking at our brand outside of Africa, but I think we should also really, really question what we think of ourselves. I would like us to use these 3 days here in Kigali to come together as a community of practice, to commit to a shared vision that places diversity of voices, diversity of stories at the center of how we sell our 55 countries to the world, to commit to bringing the voices, untrained, of young people into our community, to lead and mentor as well as employ, to forestall unintended consequences, to tell the expected stories of hope. The video that we showed you was something that we did as an organization when we celebrated our 20th anniversary, because there are just not enough stories about African successes. To be bold and not only look into the mirror, but have the courage to fix aspects of the image that reflect back, to find balance and integrity. Because, ladies and gentlemen, how can we leave our mark if we continue to tiptoe around the African story? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gina. And while you're there, we'll just take one or two questions very quickly. You may want to sit so we don't keep you standing for too long. And because we're also looking at specifically CEOs on the front line, and like you have said, you really championed the cause of changing the narrative, and your company actually was instrumental to developing that brilliant video we saw. But the quick question I would like to start off with would be, how do we as communicators or brand experts sort of find a better control in and around between the personality of the CEO we are managing, corporate identity? Sometimes these things have blurred lines. So from your expertise or level of expertise, how would you go about that?
Question is how to find the balance.
How do you find the balance managing the personality or the personal identity of the CEO and, of course, balancing it out with the corporate
So I think,
identity?
I think a lot of the work that we have done is around, personal branding as well as, corporate branding and trying to marry the two. And I'll give you an example. We were the ones that launched Safaricom when they came into the Kenyan market. And the CEO, Michael Joseph, very strong personality, very clear on what he thought was important, but he had not worked on the continent before. So, it was really our company brief to, let him know at every possible opportunity that some of the things that he wanted to do could not possibly work in Kenya because he had not worked on the African continent at all. And not only that, there had not been a mobile industry in Kenya before. So not only were we creating the brand for Safaricom, but we were also building the mobile industry. And I think it was really a matter of being quite a strong personality myself and being able to counter Michael, who was also an extremely strong personality. And we had very difficult moments, but I think he came to respect the fact that I didn't always take instructions on what he thought was the right way. And he was able to understand that local nuances were very important. So I think as professionals in this field, as the people in this room, I think it is really, really important that we try and balance that, the people's personalities and the brand, and to try and make sure that, we are clear on what the brand values are and that the CEO understands that, because it is not about the CEO, it is about building a brand that is going to, live on much longer than the CEO. So it's definitely a balancing act, but I think it is about us being very clear as professionals that we know our craft and that we're able to stand up to the person that is actually going to be writing our checks to say, actually, no, that's not going to work.
Thank you. Okay, we've got one question here.
Yes. My name is Wilfred Marube from the Public Relations Society of Kenya. I have one comment to make. Probably it's a question. I wonder from your experience how you'd advise when you have CEOs who willingly take credit for reputational success of an organization. How do you convince them also to take responsibility for the threats towards that same reputation, especially in the public sector? What are your views and your experience on that area?
So I don't think I understood the question. Can we just go through that question? Sorry.
Okay. I'm saying that it's very easy for CEOs to take credit for successes of an organization. But then how do you make them take responsibility for the failures of the brand?
Especially when there's a backlash, say, for instance, or an impending backlash. How do you make them take responsibility?
Again, I think, it's really about us being very clear on what our advice is and giving them the strategic advice on the importance of being, responsible, whether it's for success or failure. I think a lot of PR companies or a lot of companies that I've come across, especially the ones that are newer, aren't as forceful as I think we're, as we're being able to be because of our experience. So I think it's really important that we, we are very clear about the advice that we're giving. And, it's human nature. When something's going well, the CEO definitely wants to take credit. And, when things aren't going well, then it's always somebody else's problem. But I think the advice that we've always given is that you can't do that. You have to embrace both the success and the failure. And we've really seen our clients coming to respect our point of view, and that has come about because we've been around a long time. But I think it is a big problem, and I can see it as a problem. But it's just something that we have to keep on, and talking to boards, training them, and also doing a lot of media training with different levels of management throughout the period of our contracts with the clients.
Thank you very much. Session, and while we have just you.